You ask about an understanding of magnetic center, and you point out that I have stated that it is something which exists within us, that we are essentially born with, and then you find a contradiction with some of the writings of Gurdjieff and Uspensky, where Gurdjieff will say magnetic center of roles, is formed by conscious impressions and influences, describing the varieties of influences. So it is something acquired. Gurdjieff is quoted by Uspensky as saying that the result of these influences, after a certain time, form within him a kind of magnetic center, which, if it receives sufficient nourishment, and if there is no strong resistance on the part of the other sides of man's personality, it begins to influence a person's orientation. So your question is how to reconcile these different perspectives. You will find in Uspensky's In Search of the Miraculous and in other transcriptions of his meetings that he has stated, despite his brilliant intellect, that he could not understand where magnetic center came from, why people from the same family, same influence and environment would have entirely different experiences. And all of us know, most likely, that we who are on a spiritual journey, who are driven by that zeal, that passion, that resonance with spiritual ideas, may come from families where no one else has anything like that, even with the same education, the same influences, etc. So, I suggest to you that it is a bit of a both and. Clearly, the propensity, the disposition for what Gurdjieff calls magnetic center, attraction to spiritual ideas, to be influence, as opposed to a mere interest in a influence, the materialism of our secular world. Clearly that is impacted by what comes our way. For instance, when I was very young, my father would take me to monasteries, old cathedrals in Europe, and no doubt there was then already some experience of the silence, of the vibration of the old stones where centuries of prayers had taken place. Something was established, some contemplative attraction, which may not have been as evident had that kind of outside influence not come into my life. And yet, in my case, the religious environment I grew up in was very social gospel oriented, very rational. The ideology that was forced upon us, if you will, both theologically and from family, was entirely outward. That kind of mainstream Protestantism that knows nothing about mystery, wonder, the sacred. It all is reduced to what the rational mind can grasp. And yet I remember when I went to Thésée in France, the little village where a monastic community had been established, I was exposed to the experience of silence, to some conversation with priests. I went towards that. It was the beginning of claiming something that was entirely foreign to the religion of my environment. And that only progressed in quantum leaps after that, to the point where the mystic theology that I live and embrace is at opposite ends, if you will, from the theology of the world that I grew up in, that I was around professionally even, mainstream National Council of Churches and such. I kept going further and further into the deep magnetic center, resonance, esotericism, orthodox mysticism, etc. So, though one can recognize some influence from the outside world, it was a deep hunger that propelled me beyond the boundaries that I knew of into a new land, a foreign land, taking immense risks, even one-way tickets to esoteric schools and such. What was that? That was not the result of growing influences. That was a hunger that was willing to sacrifice everything, including safety, certainly comfort, security. And my experience across the decades has been that in teaching hundreds of spiritual seekers, getting to know their stories, my experience is that something of an old soul is present within the serious ones, the dedicated ones, those who continue on, who do not stop, who are not satisfied, who keep journeying into the mystery, seeking transformation. Some of them have nothing in their environment that could justify that, but they come into this life already with some sensitivity. Certainly the vicissitudes of life can lead them in one direction or another. They might miss that moment when a book or a person appears that can take them where their soul really wants to go. But especially in our secular, materialistic, godless society, we cannot hope for external influences to shape personality in the direction of be influence. There's the New Age, the popular authors in those areas, and yet they lead often to dead ends, to only partial truth, and something within needs more. That needing more, those deep choices, such as Gurdjieff's choice that he mentions in Meetings with Remarkable Men, in that new year at his birthday, when he decided either it would be in the direction of ending his life or sacrificing something that would cause him to always remember. This was not personality speaking, because personality was about survival, not destroying itself. It transcends that. Certainly he had the influences of his early life, his father, the exotic world he came from, the Russian Orthodox mentor of his youth, that fed all that. But there comes a time when something intimately essential rises up to seek our destiny, spiritually speaking, and which I say transcends personality, leaves it in the dust. In fact, the very efforts to create that Kejan body, that higher being body, that soul, to transport us in a way beyond the grave, is no longer in the hands of personality. It may have played a role, but now we are in another realm which transcends time, which brings forth remembrances from another life, another kind of experience. The degree to which one is dedicated reveals the gravitas of such a magnetic center. A far cry from the eclectic, superficial studies of the so-called New Age types who wander about the borders, the outside boundaries of anything truly transformative, truly of sea influence. But those who go off on their own, requiring super effort, requiring a willingness to trust the unknown, the undiscovered country, that comes from someplace elemental. And so I suggest to you that one can see a combination, and that with further reading, even if it is necessary, you would find references from both Gurdjieff and Uspensky, perhaps Maurice Nicole, that increase this understanding of the mystery, which is magnetic center. But I would suggest to you that to decide on these mysteries, these truths, based on the appropriate authority, written word, not living person. In other words, fragment of what somebody once said, but because it is sacrosanct from the person or a person considered in the right place in the hierarchy of importance, that is the right definition, is to undermine one's own deepest intuitive spiritual capacities to hear not merely from a teacher, a great teacher perhaps, but from spirit itself. And so we live with the paradoxes and the contradictions and don't seek to have a clear, precise answer that satisfies the intellect, because in the end it is insignificant. The issue is not what is magnetic center. The issue is go out and find what your heart yearns for, even if it cannot name it. Get on the journey. Go after it. Dare to seek that you may find.